Welcome everyone, and in today's session, we will be covering a topic on React, and the goal is to understand how to build a reusable, accessible React Tooltip component. That is the whole idea of today's live session. The goal is also to learn about accessibility and some better practices as we progress in the stream. So welcome back again, and let's start with the session. So from a very high level perspective, what you are seeing on the screen is the overall architecture of our tooltip component. So now tooltip is a very useful application, and many of you are already familiar with what a tooltip is and how it works. Just to give you an example, if you take a look at the api-draw application itself, and if I hover over on any of these tools, you will see a pop-up like window coming up. In this case, it's showing brush/fineliner. So this is nothing but a tooltip. Okay, now if I hover over to another tool, it shows that this is an arrow tool. So this tooltip is very important part of a modern UI application. Now it's not just showing up a label with a description. It is also about how and where this tooltip has to be placed. That is also an important logic we have to consider. The placement of the tooltip can be multiple. For example, the tooltip can be placed at the bottom. It can be placed on the right side, or it can be placed depending on wherever my element under the tooltip is all about. So apart from some hard-coded positioning, we should also need to have a way to automatically position the tooltip as per the layout of the application. That is one of our goal as well. Now from a very high level perspective, what we are about to build is kind of demonstrated in this tooltip architecture diagram. So now let's take a look at what this document says, right? So we are building an accessible, flexible tooltip component with intelligent auto placement. It measures available space and automatically chooses the best position to stay fully visible within the viewport. So this is kind of the theme of the application. Our tooltip will definitely have some props. Of course, there will be a children, which is nothing but whatever goes inside the tooltip. Then an attribute to tell where the tooltip should be placed. For example, top, bottom, left, right, or maybe auto in case we need it. And also an auto flip a boolean flag. When false, the placement never changes. Okay, these are some of the configurations we will be adding in our tooltip component. Then our tooltip component will also have some internal state like hovered, focused, dismissed, style, and we also need to resolve the placement as well. So these are some of the other important aspects. We'll also understand about the practical usefulness of the refs that React provides to us, right? So we have a trigger ref, a tooltip ref, a close timeout ref. The refs are the way to access the actual DOM element in React. Then we'll be talking about how this entire thing will be rendered. We'll be talking about the accessibility features. We'll be talking about some of the key features. We'll also see event handling and how the data and the control flow happens. And of course, we will be creating a portal. Portal is one of an important feature in React, wherein many applications like a model dialog, a tooltip, and some other useful UI UX experience typically comes into play. Okay, and all this will be covered in whatever time we have. So we are not time bounded at this point in time. I am roughly estimating around 1.5 to 2.5 hours for this entire session kind of. I hope the agenda is kind of quite clear, and if yes, let's continue and begin at the beginning. So before I do any of those things, let me just go back and let's kind of make this a little smaller so that the views are absolutely clear and visible. So at this point in time, the way we will be developing this application is we'll be using CodePen, which is an interactive environment where we can try out various front-end concepts and applications. Of course, you can use VS Code or any other editor that you prefer to use. The reason I am using CodePen is that I can easily share this URL with you once the session is over, and you can see the exact state of the application, and you can also go through the code and understand every line of it. This is kind of an idea, and I'll be sharing this link in the YouTube description as well. And we will begin small, and that is kind of an overall idea of this session as well. We don't have to rush through it. So every component will be evolved as we kind of progress in this session. So just to kind of again give you an example of how this component will be evolved is, maybe I'll come back in here and let me draw out something of us. So we will be beginning with a simple tooltip. So this is how we will be kind of beginning our tooltip journey. Okay, and then we will be kind of adding some props and children. Okay, and as we do this, we will also understand some important part of the React itself. Okay, then we will be handling some events like mouse over. Okay, and maybe also some events like keyboard focus. Okay, and then also handling certain events like escape, dismissal, because when you press the escape, the tooltip should go away. Correct, and then there are more things actually. For example, area for accessibility. Then the refs plus DOM measurement. And then the portal rendering. Now if you take a look at this, you will see that there are lot of things that will be kind of building as we progress into this application. I hope this is clear so far, and there will be more thing actually in here. For example, there will be something like the placement. The placement of the tooltip. Okay, maybe I could simply go back here and change the text color if it allows me to do it. Okay, so the opacity seems to be very low here. Okay, and then we will have something called as a viewport protection, so that the tooltip doesn't go out of the view of the users. That is kind of an important aspect as well. Okay, and then we have something called as hoverable tooltip. Okay, and Of course, then we have things like auto flip and auto placement as well. So we have auto flip and auto placement. So this is the overall idea of what we are building. The reason I am kind of drawing this out is because so that you can exactly see what we will be getting into and what every part of this box teaches you as well as part of a React developer and front-end development in general. That is kind of an idea. I hope this is clear so far. So now let's go back and take a look at the setup of our application. So now I'll head back to the code pen and we have a simple React application setup in here that has a app function that simply renders this static text on the screen. Okay, and we have an index HTML here that has a div with an ID of app. This is where our React application will be mounted. Okay, now if I go back to the script again, let's take a look at that part, right? So here on line 18, we are getting that element which has an ID of an app, storing it in a root, and then we are rendering our app component on this root. This is the absolute basics of the React. I'm just kind of doing a quick revision so that we know that how this UI piece is being displayed onto the screen. The app being rendered onto the root DOM in here. Okay, this is the absolute basic. And we also have some CSS. Since CSS is not the core agenda for this course or for this session, I have some CSS already defined in here and put it in the style.css, which you can refer at a later point in time. So this CSS is not very critical for the understanding of how the component work, but it's here for your demo so that you can take a look at this. Okay, but probably we'll reach out to this as and when needed. So this is the absolute beginning of our tooltip component. So far so good. Okay, now let's begin at the beginning. So what we need to do is to get a minimal tooltip going on here, and we should have an ability to render it on the screen. So that is what we will be doing. So I'll come back to my app application or a function called application in here, and I'll kind of delete this entire thing out. Okay, so now you will see that the right side is getting updated. The preview shows nothing because the main is empty. And here our goal is to build a tooltip component which we haven't yet created, but we will shortly create this as well. And we'll pass in a content. Maybe I am calling it as I am a tooltip. Okay, this will be the shape of my tooltip component. And we saw that the tooltip has some props, which is nothing but the children, right? So this will have a button with a class name of trigger, so that some specific styles is attached to this button. Okay, and we will label this as hover me. So at this point in time, there is no tooltip component, okay, and things will fail and nothing will be rendered. So here we are kind of doing something like an API based rendering where we are defining the shape of our APIs, how our APIs are a component and how we want this component to be developed. That is kind of an idea of this approach, so that you can see failing code first and then we will kind of write enough code to make this component work for us. Okay, that is an idea. So now we have to build this tooltip component. That is the first thing that we will do. So to make it work, we will come outside this function app and create a new function called tooltip. And we know that it has some props. So we know this is nothing but a children prop. And also we have this content being passed as a prop, right? So we can kind of destructure this. This is basic JavaScript that we are applying in here. So we are saying that all the children should go into this variable called children, and the content has to be placed into a separate variable called content. So this content will go into this content variable, and rest of the things will go into this children variable. Okay, so at this point in time, this tooltip component is not returning anything. Okay, and in React, a component should return a JSX, right? So that is where our next statement will come into play. So here what we will do is we will return. Okay, and we are creating an empty fragment because I don't want to create any additional markup. And first we will be rendering the children. So children is nothing but the entire button itself. Okay, and you should see something getting rendered very, very soon. Okay, so let's see what is the error here. So always watch out for the errors. So what it's saying is the tooltip is not defined. The reason being the tooltip here we have uppercase the T, and here we have lowercase the t. Now these are very small observations and convention that we need to be keep in mind when we develop components, right? These are kind of case sensitive. Okay, so simple fix is to fix this case here, and now things should work, and you should see hover me button being rendered onto the screen. So that's it. Our first step, we had a failing component and we wrote enough code to make the component work out for us. Okay, but then now what we can do now is, since we already have the content here, correct? I could render that component as well. So I'll come back to our return function here. Okay, I'll create some new lines, and after the children, I'll create a div with a class name of tooltip, and I'll render the content inside this div. So now what will happen is once this is rendered, you will immediately see the tooltip being rendered as well. Okay, at this point we haven't created any interactivity, and that is the reason you are seeing both the button as well as the tooltip in place. Okay, now as you are learning this, also you can go back and take a look at these classes that we are using. Right? For example, here we have a class name called trigger for the button, and then here we have a class name called tooltip. So probably for just quick reference, I can open up my style.css, and we can take a peek at both of these things here, right? So here we have all the classes defined. We have a trigger class here which has some stylings attached to it, and similarly we will be having other classes as well. For example, we have a tooltip class here which has a position of fixed. Okay, and you can take a look at all these classes as you encounter it. Okay, I'm heading back to the code again. So at this point in time, we have a simple component that renders a button and a content within a div which has a class name of tooltip. So now step 1 we have achieved. We have a successful component being rendered onto the screen. Okay, now what we can do is we can go to the next step, right? And what is that next step? We have to think through it. Now obviously you can see that the tooltip is immediately rendered. Okay, that is one part, one observation you have in place in here, correct? So this is one thing we have to understand. But more importantly, if you take a look at the structure of the tooltip, two important things you need to understand. Anything inside this tooltip, it's children. Okay, that is what we kind of know, right? And we understand that part. Okay, also this content, right? This is also kind of a children or an attribute, but we can destructure it for the sake of simplicity. Okay, but more importantly for our purpose, this is kind of a children, but because this is being wrapped within the tooltip component. Okay, so far I think this should be very, very clear. Now what is step 2? The step 2 is to show the tooltip only on hover. Okay, this is kind of step 2. We have to kind of achieve this. We haven't yet reached this step yet. We are only at step 1. Now, for this to happen, we need some state or we need some memory. Why we need that? Because we need to tell the component to remember where the mouse pointer is currently, right? We need to figure out where the pointer is, whether the pointer is on the tooltip element or not. And for this we need to add some state. And how do we implement or manage state in React, right? We all know that the absolute core primitive for managing the state is a hook called as useState. Okay, so that is what we need to implement now. So the first thing that I will do here is I will come back to my React where we have imported the React, and will also import useState, which is a hook, named hook, right? Named export. So this will allow us to manage state in our React application. And once we kind of import this, we can update our tooltip component. That is kind of a next step. So we'll come back to our tooltip component. And our line number 5, and we will create a state using the useState, and by default I will pass a value of false. And useState returns a tuple. Tuple means the state itself, and we are calling this state as a hovered, whether hovering is happening or not. And we are also providing a method called setHovered so that we can update the state. So line number 5 is the most critical part of any React application, and this is where the state definition is happening for us. Okay, so the useState returns a tuple. Tuple contains two values. One is the state itself, and another is an updater function which we can use to update the state. Now you can name this anything, but from a better practice perspective, we are naming it as per what the state is representing. So once we have the state, now we can attach some events onto our tooltip. So now what we will be doing is, we had this React fragment, correct? We will convert this into a span. Okay, and then we will be attaching some event handler to this. So that is kind of an idea now. So our goal is to convert this fragment into a span. So at this point in time, the moment I change this, nothing happens here, right? Everything is kind of rendered. Now you will be having a span being wrapped into this component, right? So if I come back in here and probably right click and inspect our component, just to show you in here, if I kind of highlight this, okay, I'll click on this. You can see that on the right side, our button and our div is now wrapped within a span element. So when we use React fragment, there was nothing in here. Now we have a span element to which we can attach some event handlers. That is kind of an idea. So once we understand this part, let's come back to our span element and add couple of event handlers. The first one is on mouse enter. Okay, so whenever the mouse enters this span, we will write a arrow function and update the state to true, so that the state changes from false to true for the hovered effect that we need to have in an application. Okay, and when the mouse leaves this span, we also need to attach an event handler, and we'll again set the hover to false. Okay, now this is not a better practice to write inline events like this. Okay, please note in mind, this is not a better practice, but for the sake of demonstration, I am putting things in here so that every line of code is absolutely clear. Okay, so at this point in time, once I add this function, nothing changes yet. Okay, because only the state is changing. Okay, and we are not using this hovered state anywhere in our application. and that is the reason you are not seeing any effect on the screen. And now what we can do is, after we render the children, this tooltip has to be dynamically rendered whether the mouse or pointer is hovering or not. Okay, for that what we will do, we will create a block of code and we check if it is hovered, then only we will be rendering this tooltip component. Okay, so we have a conditional block of code now. So now at this point in time, if you observe the output here, you are not seeing that content because this content is only rendered when the hovered variable is true. The hovered variable will become true when we have a mouse enter event on the span. Okay, and when we move the mouse out, the hovered will become false and nothing will be rendered. So by default, the mouse is not on the target element, so we don't see anything. But if I move the mouse over, you will immediately see the tooltip appearing, correct? Because we are still within the region of that component which is triggering this hovering effect. The moment I move out, the tooltip goes out. So building a tooltip is as simple as this. The challenge is in the other constraint that we had about the placement, right? It could be on top, it could be on left, it could be on right. Right now it will always be on the bottom no matter where it is. But then we have a little success achieved, correct? Because now we can dynamically show this tooltip on this mouse event that is kind of happening. So this is step 2. Okay, so far I think things are clear because we are moving at a very slow pace here, right? So what we have to understand is what is useState doing in here. Okay, useState we already talked about. It gave us forward state and also a method to update the state as well. And the moment we move the mouse over this target element, we can see the content getting displayed. So this is again absolute basics of React, and I hope this doesn't need any further explanation kind of. Now comes the third step. Okay, so what is the third step? I'll actually put down the step in here so that we know what we are doing. Step 3 is remove the wrapper. So remove the wrappering. The reason I am adding it out is, so see, technically our tooltip component doesn't need the span wrapper. Okay, but we added the span wrapper just so that we can attach some event handlers to it. So in our case, the span that is here, right, within this tooltip is owning the interaction. Whereas in actual case, this button should be the target for the tooltip and not the span. Okay, I think I am hoping sense here, or I am making sense here. Okay? That is kind of an idea. We temporarily created this span so that we could control it. So architecturally what we need is something like this. So just to kind of show you, what we need is the button, correct? And this button could have mouse event, and it could have keyboard events, and it could have accessibility, and also this button will be the ref. Ref is nothing but the DOM element that we are interested in. Correct? So this is kind of an idea. This button is what we need to target. Okay, right now it's on the span. Okay, and this is our end goal, right? Okay, so we know right now it is span, but we need to kind of change it to button. So this is when another important concept of React will come into play, and we'll see that how that has to be applied. And that concept is called clone element, and we have to import it first. Clone element will allow us to create a clone of our React component or element and add more behaviors to it. Okay, let's see how to do that. The reason we have to clone that element is because we are not owning that element, right? This button, right? We are not owning it. The button is kind of provided from within this tooltip. Okay, if I need to attach any additional behavior to it, we don't want to directly attach to it. If we want to clone it, attach behavior, and then kind of render it. That is kind of something we need to achieve. Okay, so for that, the first thing we will do is we will import some important functions here. One is called clone element, and also this important function called isValidElement. Okay, which we can actually use it shortly, kind of. So these are the two functions I am kind of importing. Okay, and once we import this, we will come back to our tooltip function, and we can first validate whether any invalid elements are being passed to this tooltip as a children or not. Okay, it should be a valid React element, kind of. That is kind of an idea. Okay, many things are not valid React element, like a boolean, the null, and all those things, right? We simply have to avoid those things. First thing we can do is we can write a if condition, and we will say is valid element children, because we are passing a children here, right? So if it is not valid, we will throw a new error. The error is tooltip requires a single React element. Okay, tooltip requires a single React element. So this is a very simple validation we added. Okay, let's correct this spelling in here. Okay, so now we have this simple validation set up. And after this, what we have to do is we have to kind of set up our code to handle events on the cloned element rather than on the span. Okay, that is kind of a next step we have to do. So on line let's 11, we will create a variable called trigger, which will be the result of clone element. Okay, and we are actually cloning the children that is being passed to this function, and we are adding two events to this, which is mouse enter, which is the first one, which we already know, and then on mouse leave, which is the second event. So now we have this children element into this variable called triggered because we attach some triggers to it. Okay, you can name this anything. I am calling it trigger because that children is what triggers the tooltip. Okay, now once I have that in place, what I can do is I can remove the span altogether. I don't need the span anymore, and I could, instead of children, I'll render the trigger element. So this is where the clone element was used, right? Because we cloned the existing element. In this case, our existing element was a button. We removed our wrapper element called span. We attached two event handler directly to the button, even though we were not owning the button, correct? So at this point in time, if you come back and let's see what is happening in here, just to ensure everything is working, and as you hover the mouse, you still get that tooltip, and as you hover out, the tooltip is gone. So this is one important learning as part of building this React tooltip, right? So how to clone the element, then attach additional behavior to it. Okay, and this concept and this knowledge will be useful in many custom elements that we use. Now, one question could be, why do we need the clone element, right? Of course, I already mentioned that we need to attach additional information to existing React element, but more importantly, what we need to remember is React elements are generally descriptions. We should not directly modify it. They are typically descriptions. For example, we shouldn't do something like this. Just to give you an example here, we should not do children dot props dot on mouse enter. We should not do this. So technically, you will be able to write code, but it will not work as expected for multiple reasons. One is the reason being that by default in React, conventionally, mutability belongs to the state, right? If you have to make anything that change, it is state that we use using useState or useR. The props are typically immutable. We directly don't modify the props. Okay, that is one of the things that we need to do. Instead of this, what we prefer to do is to create a new element itself, because there is immutability concept in React, correct? We can use that knowledge, and instead of directly modifying or mutating, we can clone any existing children, okay, and then add additional behavior to it. So this is kind of a best practice, and this you will be using in all the React component that you will be creating. Okay, this is a very important point to note. So what you get is, after you do this activity, so originally you had something like this. This is the original. You had a button, power me text, and again a button. Correct, this is your original thing. And what you got now is something like this, which is an enhanced version. So now you have a button which has on mouse enter, on mouse leave, hover me, so this is what you are getting after you clone the element. So now you can visually see what is actually happening in the system. Okay, once we understand this, we can progress to the step 3. Now what is the step 3? Step 4. What is the step 4? Let us come back to our app here, and let's add a documentation first so that we understand what we are building. In fact, what I'll do now, I'll just move this on the top so that we have these steps documented here. Step 1 was simple hard-coded tooltip. Okay. Step 2 was show the tooltip only on hover, and step 3 is remove the wrapper, and step 4 is preserve existing event handlers. Now this is very important. When we attach an event to an existing element, in this case this button, we should also preserve if already there were any handlers on this event or not. Because if we are not careful, what will happen is any existing event handler that was attached to the button will be lost. Okay, for example, let's say if the user of this tooltip component had an event already here. For example, let me just show you with demonstration. Okay, let's say when this button was added here, the user of this component already added a on mouse enter event, something like this. Okay, so the goal is our tooltip components should not destroy this event. Right, for example, if I come back to the application now, I hover over it, I can see I am a tooltip, I am getting that message, but I am not seeing the console.log because actually we destroyed it. So this is destroyed. This is a bad practice. Okay, we have to preserve this. So let's see how we can do that. Okay, it's very simple. So we just have to kind of do some checks and implement the behavior. Okay, so let's head back to our trigger. Now I think the problem statement is very clear what is happening, correct? So once we understand the problem statement, we can simply fix it out. So line number 16 where we have the trigger, right? So this is where we'll be adding some checks. So in the on mouse center, we will be expanding this a bit. So we know that this mouse or any event receives an event parameter, correct? So we'll write it as a full function in here, and definitely we need to have this set forward equal to true. But before we do this, we have to do something like children dot drops dot on mouse enter only if it is defined. So I am doing an optional chaining with a question mark dot. This means if it is defined, call that event. Okay, so idea behind this is, so if someone defines on mouse enter event, then call it. So this optional chaining will allow us to work in places where this event is not defined also. So at this point in time, if you hover the mouse, you will see hello getting printed onto the console here. So now you are preserving that part. Okay, I hope this step is cleared as well. Okay, so you learned a couple of things in here, right? One is how to preserve existing element, and also kind of how to use the optional, what do you call it, optional operator in here, the question mark operator, correct? Otherwise I had to write if children dot drop dot on mouse enter, then call it, otherwise don't call it. Okay, so we just completed the step 4. Okay, now comes the step 5. Okay, so what is step 5? The step 5 is mouse is not enough. Okay, so mouse is not enough. This is the other thing. So our component works with the mouse, but then if we press the tab keyword, the tooltip does not appear. So if you come back to your application and press the tab keyword, you see it's highlighted in here, but the tooltip is not coming. Okay, this is an accessibility issue. Okay, so we need to track when our trigger component has focus. So now a component may have focus or may not have focus. So whenever you need to manage some state, you typically use the useState. Okay, so let's come back and implement the step 5. So the first thing that I'll do is I will come back to our tooltip component and add another piece of state using the useState. By default it is false. Okay, and I'll call it as focused, and the updater function I'll call it as set focused. Okay, so now I have a way to let React know that something is focused or not. So now we have to handle this focus event as well. So let's come to our variable trigger, wherein we already have a couple of events defined, right? So one thing we have to do is we also have to fix the on mouse leave as well. So let's fix this as well. So we have on mouse leave, set forward equal to false, and also children drop start on mouse leave. If it is defined, invoke it. Okay, so this will complete our previous step also. So we need to handle the focus event. So for focus event, we have two things. One is on focus. Okay, we have an event that is received as an argument, and when we move out of an element, or the element is not in focus, or it is tabbed out, we get on blur event. So these are the two events we have to handle. Okay, and what we will do in the on focus event is nothing but, first thing is we will check if the children is already passing an on focus event or on focus function. If yes, we will simply call it. Now we know why we are doing it. We don't want to kill existing event handlers. Okay, and then we will say set focus to true. In the same fashion, we will say in here children dot drop start on blur. If it is defined, invoke it, and then we will say set focus to false. So simple state changes, correct? But then now we also have to calculate the visibility of this component, because now the component can be visible either when it is hovered or when it is focused as well, right? Because now we need to support both hovering and also focusing via the tab. Okay, so let's come back in here. So I do some reorganization of the code so that it's very easy to track it out. Okay, so at this point in time, after all the triggers are defined, we will write a new variable called visible. Okay, and this is nothing but this visible should be true if the mouse is being hovered or the pointer is being hovered, or if the element is focused via the tab. Okay, and then we have to show the tooltip when the visible is true. So now what will happen? It will support both the hovering as well as the focusing via the tab as well. Right. So now if I come to my application and press tab, you can see that the tooltip is immediately displayed. And if I tab out, okay, we have a error because the children's spelling is misspelled here, right? So let's correct the children's spelling here first. So children. So we corrected the spelling. Okay, now we come back to the application again, tab to focus and tab out to focus out. So now the tab is working, the focus is working, the accessibility is there, and if I hover the mouse, you can still see the tooltip, and if I hover out, the tooltip is gone. Okay, now we kind of implemented the step 5 of our tooltip as well. So this is an interesting place to kind of stop and ponder what we did, correct? So what we did is something like we started with a hard-coded tooltip. Then we kind of added the behavior to show the tooltip only on the hover. Okay, and to attach the event handlers, we created a wrapper span element. Then we realized this extra span element is not needed, so we kind of removed it with the help of the clone element. And finally, we also added support for the mouse as well, right? So that is what we did. So when we say mouse is not enough, we simply added support with keyboard focus. Okay, and now comes the step 6. Okay, so what is step 6? Support escape to dismiss. This is a standard behavior. So anytime in any application you have a tooltip coming up, it's expected that when you press the escape key, the tooltip should go away. That is kind of an expected behavior, that the tooltip should be dismissible. So again, we need a state, right, when it has to be dismissed. The moment we know that, we can create a state using the useState. So at a later point in time, maybe as you are progressing into the React, right, you can club all these multiple states into a reducer and make it work as well. Or maybe later you can, if you are using some external library like Justin, Jotai or Redux, right, you can replace it. But those are the secondary aspect of it, not the primary. Okay, so now having said that, let's introduce the state. So const useState false. Okay, and we will call this as dismissed and set dismissed. So one step at a time, very slow, right? So now we know, okay, there has to be a way to dismiss this tooltip whenever the escape button is pressed. So at this point in time, without worrying about any other code, we know the visibility, right? Because visibility is either hovered or focused, and it should not be dismissed, right? Because if someone dismisses it, right, the tooltip should not be shown. Okay, so that thing we can immediately add in here in the const visible equal to, this should be shown if it is hovered or it is focused, and dismiss should be false. So we know at this point in time by default the dismiss is false. So nothing has broken, right? If I hover, I can see it. If I move out, it's hidden. If I press tab, it is shown. If I tab out, it is hidden. The only thing we have to do is to handle the keyboard events. Okay, that is what we'll be doing now. So let's come back to our application. Create a variable called handle key down, okay, which receives an event object. Every DOM event has this event object that tells you about the state of the event depending on what kind of event that is. It can be a keyboard event, it can be a mouse event, it can be a pointer event, it can be anything. Okay, but we get these details. And then inside this we can write if event dot key is equal to triple equal to is for the strict equality, if it is an escape key. Okay, so when you press the escape on your keyboard, the event dot key will contain this text called escape. We'll say set dismiss to true. So okay, we only define the handle key down event. We haven't attached it to any DOM yet. Okay, so this will not work yet because we haven't attached it. Okay, that is the next important thing we have to do. So now what we can do is, once we have this, just for the sake of organization, I will copy this entire thing. Okay, I'll paste it above the trigger, because now this handle event will become part of this triggering element, correct? That's why. And in the on key down, okay, so we don't have an on key down yet. So after the blur, we will add on key down. Okay, that gives us an event, and we can now implement something here, right? What is that something? The first thing is, of course, we'll if any props are already passed, we will simply call the on key down event with an optional operator, so that even if it is not defined, it works, and we pass in a event object. And then we will say handle key down. So now as our children element is cloned, we are attaching mouse event, focus event as well as a keyboard event as well. Okay, now everything is kind of connected. Okay, we have this error here, right? So let's see what this error is all about. Okay, so let's take a quick look at our code. So far we simply attached an on key down event handler, and in the handle key down, what we are doing is we are checking if the event.key is escape. We are setting dismiss to true. Okay, but then we also have to do one more thing in here, right? So whenever again the mouse enter happens, okay, we have to kind of bring it back as well. Okay, so if you take a look at this point in time, dismiss is true, so our tooltip is not coming. Correct? So we have to fix this. This essentially means whenever the hover happens again, we have to set the dismiss to false. Okay, so we can come back to the mouse enter, and here we say set dismiss to false. Okay, so now if you come back and let's try this again one more time. Over. Let me just check. There are a couple of things I need to do in here. Okay, now it is saved. The page was not refreshed actually. Okay, so this error that you see on the screen, right, uncaught type failed to resolve module vertical React, you can ignore it for some time. So these are these code pen issues. Okay, so let's test our functionality. Before that, let's review the code first. So we had the handle key down, then we attached the handle key down to the on key down event. Okay, and whenever the hover happens, we set the dismiss to false and set hover to true. Okay, and also this should be done whenever the focus happens as well. So in the on focus, you have to say set dismiss to false. Okay, so now our state model is almost kind of complete. So we have a hover state, we have a focus state, and we have a dismiss state. Okay, but let's see whether this is working or not at this point in time. Okay, so I will come back to my code again, and I'll hover over it. It's working. One part is working. I'll tab. It's working. Tab out is working. I'll hover over it, and again press escape. Now the escape for some reason is not working. Okay, so let's see why this is happening. So from a code perspective, I am kind of not seeing any issue yet, but let's review it one more time. So we have a tooltip, and the tooltip rendering is perfect. We have all the events defined in here, the handle key down. Okay, so let's put some logs here and let's see what is happening in here. So I'll say console.log event.key just to see whether this code is kind of executed or not. Okay, sometimes it's kind of useful. So if I press escape on the document, nothing is happening because we are attaching this to the button. If I hover it onto the button and I press escape, nothing is happening. If I tab it and press escape, it's kind of working. See the difference here. I actually wanted you to see this. Now, why this is working is because if you take a look, right, if you take a look at this code, the children that we have is a button. That essentially means the escape is attached to the button in our case, in the on key down, correct? So that's the reason if I hover using the mouse, the reason here I don't need escape here because the mouse is still over it, correct? In any case, if I move out, the tooltip goes away. But let's say if I focus this with my keyboard, now this is a point where I need to support escape so that the tooltip goes away. But then when I hover the mouse over, the tooltip should come back again. And if I escape again, the tooltip should go away. Okay, I think you got the behavior, right? I actually wanted to see this before I kind of explain what exactly is happening. Okay, that is kind of an idea. Okay, but later on we will see typically some better practices, whether to attach escape to the button itself or whether the escape key should be attached to the global DOM element. There are a lot of other questions that will come into mind. So at this point in time, our step 6 is kind of completed. Okay, so now we are heading towards the step 7. What is step 7? It is about tooltip semantics. Okay, so step 7, add tooltip semantics. So what is this tooltip semantics? So visually, the browser knows that the tooltip and the element that triggers the tooltip, which is this button, this belong together, right? Because that's how things should be designed. But a screen reader does not know this. Okay, screen reader are typically useful for accessibility for people with specific challenges. So screen reader doesn't know that the hover, the trigger button and the tooltip itself are they connected. So we have to connect them via area label. Okay, that is where the accessibility comes into play. Okay, so let's try this out. And also there are other important thing in React. There could be many tooltip in our application, correct? And we have to kind of create a lot of unique IDs in the application. So React has some helper hooks to do that as well for us. And one of it is useId. useId gives us a unique ID that we can use in the application. Okay, I'll come back to that point as we focus on it at that point in time. Now what we have to do is to add some area labels so that we can connect the tooltip, right? So idea is something like this. So if I come back here, so now at this point in time we have this hover me text, correct? And then we have a tooltip. So we have this at this point in time. Okay, but the screen reader does not automatically know that these two things are connected. Okay, so for example, screen reader does not automatically know that these two are connected. Okay, so this is our problem statement. Now what we need something, correct? So something like let's say a trigger, and we need to have an area which will describe, okay, by this area label called described by, and we'll give it the tooltip ID just to connect things together. Okay, and this will actually connect to the tooltip that has an ID of tooltip ID and a role of tooltip. Okay, these are accessibility basics. Okay, I'm not kind of going into the detail of the accessibility basic, but then this gives you a hint, okay, how two things are kind of connected. Okay, and how the screen reader will know that how to treat them when it is being rendered on the screen. Okay, this is a very important concept. Of course, we will need to use a lot of unique IDs we have to create. Rather than creating it manually, React provides something called useId, which we can use. Okay, so this is where the beginning of our next step is all about. Okay, so let's add back to the code. And let's see how we can implement this. Okay, we have to take it slowly at a time. Okay, and I'm just figuring it out, kind of where to put this out. Okay, so let's come back in here. Okay, before I do any of those things, let me just show you this useId. I just wanted you to understand what this is. So if you take a look in here, you can see that the useId hook in React is a built-in hook used to generate unique stable string IDs primarily for HTML accessibility attributes. Right? It ensures that the generated IDs match identically between server-side rendering. This is a different topic altogether, and client hydration. Okay, and it actually gives you a syntax that you have to import this name useId, and then you can simply call like this. Okay, and then you can attach this ID to any field. In fact, we can build custom IDs using the useId by concatenating other things to it as well. Okay, this is just the beginning. I just wanted you to be aware of, okay, there are things like this which will be helpful for a complex component that we will be building in future. Okay, now we can come back to our code, and let's connect this together for now, just so that we can complete this step of the game. So I'm just moving it out here, and I'll import useId. Okay, and then maybe I'll come back here and say const id equal to useId. Okay, and just to show you, let me log this so that you can see what this generates. Okay, I'll say useId. It gives me something back, correct? So let's see what we get in here. So we get R0. You can see on this output screen, correct? So this is how the IDs are kind of generated. So we don't have to know what this IDs actually is, because this is internally connected, and our DOM elements will understand because of the ID relationship that we set up. Okay, and then what we have to do is to connect this with the trigger. Okay, so the trigger we are defining in one place here, right? Okay, so where is our triggering point? Okay, our trigger is this button here, correct? So I'll come back here and say I'll add all the accessibility components first. Area described by. Something like this we have to do in here. Okay, so I'm just showing you where this will be kind of attached. Okay, so I'm not adding it directly on this element at this point in time. I'll come back to my trigger point, and here I'll say area described. I'm adding a new property, correct? This because we can add properties and functions here by the ID that we just created. Okay, we added this new thing. Okay, but this is not the only thing we have to do. Okay, so apart from once we do this, we have to update the tooltip also. Okay, so we'll come back to our tooltip class. So here this is our tooltip class. Okay, so this is our tooltip. Now what we will do here is we should be able to connect the role with the div element that has a class of tooltip. Okay, so here we'll say id is equal to id and role is equal to tooltip. Okay, the class name is already attached. Okay, now this completes the connection between the trigger element and the tooltip itself. Okay, so at this point in time we are not testing this out because we don't have a accessibility renderer here, but believe me, this will kind of work and the accessibility reader will be able to correctly read this. Okay, this is one important thing that we need to be aware of. Now there's one more thing we have to understand. Just like we did for the event handlers, right? We should not destroy the existing attribute that is already attached to our DOM element. Correct? So instead of directly attaching it, we can kind of create a variable that will kind of bring in together all the existing properties that is already there and then add our custom properties, okay, and then attach it to the DOM, okay, so that none of the existing expected client functionality is broken, okay, that we can kind of do. Okay, let me just check whether in this step I am doing that or not. Okay, just to kind of give you an example, the client might already pass some existing area described by trigger, right? We don't want this to be lost. Okay, otherwise we will simply kind of overwriting it. Okay, so what we can do is we can come back here and say cons described by and create an array of all the attributes that we need. So we'll say children dot props area described by id. Okay, so this will gather all the existing one if it's already defined. Now this we will do a filter. Boolean is just to ensure that we are not getting any null values, and then we join it all together as a single string. We are just gathering things together in here. Okay, so that we are not losing any information. Okay, and once we collect this together, I'll show you how this looks like. Okay, instead of assigning an ID here, I can say described by. Okay, so what this will do now, let me show you here. I'll put a console.log. Okay, so what this will do is, let's take a look at the log here. So you see there's a described by at the rate, an empty string and a R0 that is kind of coming up. Let me check whether I am missing any aspect in here. Okay, so now what I can do is, what is our trigger element, right? I can go to my trigger element and here I could add something else to ensure that this is not broken. So I'll say area described by equal to, I'm just adding it just for the demonstration sake so that you know what is happening. Now you see you have this password as well as the R0 coming out in here. Okay, it's kind of preserving it. It's not completely overwriting it. Okay, that is what kind of we have been doing. Just so that we don't lose any of the existing attributes that we are adding to our application. Okay, so this is just kind of a helper method we wrote in here. Okay, let's take a quick look one more time. So all the children, that is area described by, okay, and the ID that we created, which is the new ID. Okay, we are filtering on the boolean so that any null elements are being kind of removed. Then we are joining it kind of. Okay, so this should kind of work for now. Okay, I'm just keeping this log here for troubleshooting in case we need. Okay, so this completes the tooltip semantic. So now the screen reader understands. So now comes the other important aspect of this, where we need to access the real DOM element. The reason we need this is because we need to be able to position this tooltip to in either of the direction like left, right, top and bottom. Okay, so we need real DOM access, right? That is step 8. So let me come back to the step in here and say draft step 8 for us. It is nothing but we need access to the real DOM. Now one thing most of you who are working with React already knows that one way to access this is using the ref, and the useRef hooks typically will come into play. But there are some challenges that we need to address as we do this. So there are a lot of things that happens on the DOM here, right? So what are some of the challenges? So let me go back to my drawing board. So what we need is to position a tooltip, position a tooltip, we need to know certain things. And what are those certain things? Let me write it down here. How wide the element is. This is one of the things, correct? So let me just make this a bit bigger. Okay, so how wide the element is, how high it is, where is the tooltip, and how wide it is, how high it is. Okay, this is for the tooltip, and this the first one is for the button. Where is the button? We need to know these attributes in order to effectively position our tooltips in the application, correct? And this is where we will need access to the real DOM. So now to implement this, what we will do is head back to our application, and the first thing we will do is import useRef. Okay, and then we will come back to our code and start implementing this so that we can connect the React element with the ref so that we can directly talk to the DOM rather than the virtual DOM. Okay, so there are two refs that we need initially. Okay, one is for the trigger ref and one is for the tooltip itself. So I'll say const, sorry, it's kind of yeah. So I'll delete this ID for now, not needed. So const trigger ref equal to useRef. Initially it's pointing to nothing. Similarly for tooltip ref, useRef, none. Okay, so we have two refs created and they are pointing to nothing at this point in time. Okay, now we have to attach it. Now we have to attach the trigger ref to the triggering element and the tooltip ref to the tooltip element. Okay, so how do we do that? That's an interesting question. Yeah. So most of you know that we can simply assign it and attach it with the help of the ref attribute. Correct? So let's take a look at that. Now I'll come back to my element. Okay, so all our customized elements, they are in the triggers. So we know this is a good place to put in, correct? So we'll say ref equal to trigger ref. Okay, this is the first thing we do. Now we know that the element that is triggering it has a ref called as trigger ref attached to it. And then we also need to attach one to the tooltip itself. Okay, so let's go back to our markup. And this is our tooltip. So here we'll say ref equal to tooltip ref. So now both our triggering element as well as the tooltip itself both have a ref handler to it. So eventually we can access this element using trigger ref.current and tooltip.current. Okay, that will give us access to the underlying DOM element. So this is enough to set up the ref. We are not doing anything with the ref at this point in time, but we have a way to do this. At this point, some important question might also come up. Why can't we store the DOM nodes in state? That is one typical question that comes to a beginner's mind also, and even for some experienced people also, they might not think through this. The reason we don't have to store the DOM nodes in state is because the state is only for that information that affects the rendering, because changing state causes another to render. And a DOM reference is something we need to access, but changing the reference itself does not need to render the UI. That is why we are preferring to use the useRef, and it's a better fit for us. So now at this point in time, our step 8 is kind of connected. And now comes the important part. Now we know that our application is mounted onto the app, which is a div with an app ID, correct? So this is okay, but then in many cases and in other future advanced sessions wherein we will be building different components, we actually want a scenario where these certain components like tooltip, dialog, popover, maybe sliding menus, right? They should not be attached to the DOM, they should be attached to some other element and not the root itself. Okay, this is where the step 9 comes into play, wherein we will be rendering the tooltip into a different portal altogether. Portal is nothing but a different place apart from the root where we are mounting. Okay, that is what step 9 is all about. So I'll come back here and say step 9, render the tooltip in a portal. Okay, so this is kind of what we are doing it, and for this we will be using the React portal feature. Okay, and there are various reasons we will be doing this, because in why do we need this? Let me just show you visually also why we will be needing this in future. Let's say we have an app panel. Okay, we have an app. Okay, the app might have a panel. Correct. And the panel might have a card. Where it can happen, right? The structure, when the current structure, if you take a look. Okay, and this card can have a tooltip. But then here, our tooltip, it can actually get clipped as well, because of the positioning and the available area for this, because of this entire hierarchical structure, right? Our tooltip could actually get clipped, because by default, if you recollect, by default it is hidden, right? The tooltip is only shown when we are hovering over it something. So what we have to do is, instead of rendering the tooltip inside this root node, we will be preferring to render this inside the body element of the HTML, so that we are not worried about this long hierarchies, and we are sure our tooltip will always work correctly. Okay, this is what we are kind of trying to achieve with React Portal. Okay, so first thing we have to do for that is we have to import it, right? So maybe I'll come back to the import section. Okay, where do I import it? It's a named import. Okay, and this comes from the DOM client side. So I'll say create portal. Okay, we are importing the create portal. Okay, so the error that we are getting is the requested module React does not provide an export named create portal. Let me check whether this is in the DOM or the core React itself. Maybe I can try here. So probably what we can do is, I could, in fact, I already have React DOM here, kind of. I can directly call React DOM.createPortal also. Okay, we are using it from the React DOM client library. Okay, so what I'll do is, just so that we can check it out is, okay, let's say we already have React DOM. So I'll come back to the code where we are showing the tooltip, which is this line. Okay, this is where the tooltip is being displayed. And here, instead of directly showing it, we have to render this into a different portal. In our case, that will be document.body. Okay, so this is the last step for today actually, kind of, so that we have a working version created. Okay, so once we do this rendering into a portal, we will call it a day, and then we will be continuing the rest of the things in the separate session. Okay, so let's come back in here and this entire thing will say React DOM dot. Let me check the API first, whether we have it or not. Okay, React DOM dot create portal. Okay, it's already available directly on the DOM. So I can say React DOM dot create portal. Okay, now the thing here is we have to specify where we would like to render this, right? So we'll say this should be rendered on the document dot body. Okay, this is what we need to do to render a specific piece of the UI into a different place apart from the default root mounting component that we have. Okay, let's check whether any issues are there first, and then we will fix the issue. Okay, let's come back in here. Okay, and I'll the moment I hover, it says tooltip ref is not defined. So it could be mostly some spelling mistake. So let's verify on line number 84. So we have tooltip ref. Yeah, it's tooltip ref, lowercase. Okay, so I'll just correct the case here. And once everything is connected, this should render out correctly. Okay, let's save this and let's test it out. Okay, still there is an error. The error is react dom dot create spelling, again CRET, right? We have to be careful of the spelling. Create portal. Okay, save it and let's give this one more try. Okay, now it's saying react dom dot create portal is not a function. Okay. So let's check why this is happening. Let's verify our original documentation. The create portal is actually coming from React DOM. Okay, so if I come back here, we should get create portal from here. And we will fix this very soon, and we'll kind of call this in here. Let's say it could also be because of the way the code pen is kind of importing things. Okay, so let it save. Okay, so we still have this issue, React does not provide. Okay, so let me try this. Okay, yeah. So again, this is a code code pens import thing in here. So we're directly importing the create portal from the React DOM, and now we are kind of attaching it. Now what you have to observe is this: everything kind of seems to work expected, right? So yeah, tooltip is somewhere, that's fine for now, because we haven't kind of attached any position to it, because now it's attached to the body. That is important to understand. Okay, just to show you out, if I bring up the Chrome inspect. Okay, and now if you observe the output here, let me just make this a bit smaller, and let me just bring up the hover. Okay, we can see the hover here. Now if you see, if I move the hover, right, you will see in the body here somewhere, you are seeing div with an ID of tooltip is added on the right side. If you observe the right screen here, you will be kind of seeing that. Okay, see, it's highlighted kind of. So now it's not within your main app, it's outside your app. So that is what we need to understand. And this is the purpose of portal as well. The idea of portal is to render something outside your React application so that later we can control it with different positioning. Okay, and we are not bounded by the hierarchy in which the components are laid out. Okay, so this is kind of the conclusion for the today's sessions, wherein we covered from step 1 to step 9, and we created a basic React Tooltip component which is kind of accessible in a way, and which we can render it in a portal as well. Of course, we haven't yet covered the positioning yet. That will be covered in the subsequent live session. I'll be sharing the code pen of this session in the YouTube description window. Please take a look in the meantime, and see you all in the next session. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.